Welcome to Edimoff. Today we are continuing our series entitled Has the Quran Been Perfectly Preserved? As argue most Muslim today. We have seen in the first video ask a number of questions, and today in this video we'll attempt to answer the first question we have asked to our Muslim friend. Can you show us historically, can you prove to us historically that the Quran has been perfectly preserved by going back to the history of the formation of the Quranic text? That's what we're going to try to take a close look today by going back through the Muslim sources, Muhammad companion and all Muslim theologian of the first 3 centuries. We'll look at what they said about it, which most Muslims rely on those hadith or saying or practice of Prophet Muhammad. Muslims argue that the Quran, there is not one single comma or word that is missing from the word from the Quran, because it is the earthly copy of an eternal word, the mother of the book, which is preserved in a tablet in heaven. That's what they're telling us, and as a result, they make that claim that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. They have only one single book since the beginning of Islam. So we'll just go through a couple of surah that they are citing. Surah 15 verse 9, we saw it. If we use Yusuf Ali translation, he said, "We have without doubt," this is Allah speaking, "sent down the message, and we will assuredly guard it from corruption." So Allah is promising that the Quran will never be corrupt. That's what he's arguing. And if we take Surah 6 verse 15, using Arbery translation, "Perfect as the word of thy Lord in truthfulness and justice, no one can change his word. He's all-hearing, the all-knowing." And finally, in Surah 85, verse 21 and 22, this is what it says, "It is indeed the glorious Quran, inscribed in the very well-guarded tablet." And that tablet which is in heaven is called Allah al-Mahfuz in Arabic. So basically the Quran has been preserved in a tablet which is residing in heaven. So Muslims are claiming this is a miracle of God that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, because for 14th century they're still using the same exact Quran to the dot. But let me remind you, Muslims, the first thing, it's not a miracle if a historical document has been perfectly preserved for over 14th century. The Quran is no exception. Let's take the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in 1947 in a cave of Qumran in Israel, and these scrolls contain the Old Testament, most of the books of the Old Testament, including in particular the book of Isaiah. Exact scroll with the text that we have today was the text that existed in the 3rd or 2nd century BC, before Jesus Christ. So it has been over 2,300 years that those texts which were a copy of the Old Testament, we have access to them today. Now, yet, do the Christians claim this is a miracle? No. It speaks of the integrity of the scribe who copied down the text faithfully that they received from those prophets and from generation after generation. And that's why we have access to those texts today. And secondly, we will see in the series of video that we'll be presenting in the coming weeks that the argument of the perfect preservation of the Quran does not sustain scrutiny of historical fact, because we'll get into those historical facts, and it doesn't hold to the careful examination of the origin of the formation of the Quran, as Muslims are reporting are arguing today that it has been perfectly preserved. And we'll go back to the Muslim sources, to those Muslim scholars that these Muslims rely upon to show you what the historical facts are. So we'll try to answer that question to prove historically whether the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Now, we gave you the hadith last time. Take note. This is Sahih Bukhari. Bukhari was an imam from Uzbekistan who traveled throughout the Arab world trying to collect information regarding the Prophet Muhammad and what his revelation and everything that he has revealed during his lifetime. But he was born 200 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad. He came and he assembled what Muslims call Hadith, which are the saying and the practice of Prophet Muhammad, and these Hadiths are authentic. So every single Sunni Muslims recognize these are authoritative texts, and that's why we're relying on them, nothing else. Not my opinion or somebody else's opinion, but these scholars recognized by Muslims. So Sahih Bukhari is saying in volume 6, book 69, Hadith 509 to 511, we're going to go and read it. He's saying, and narrated by Zayd ibn Thabit. Now, not Zayd ibn Thabit was the secretary of Prophet Muhammad, his scribe. He was writing down his revelation during the time of Prophet Muhammad. He was instructed by Abu Bakr, and we're going to read it, the first caliph, to put together, to compile the Quranic text, because those who were memorizing those revelations went to a war and many of them were dying in those battles. So the second caliph, Omar, got worried about the situation that they're going to lose these revelation that Muhammad left them. So he suggested Abu Bakr to find somebody who can collect and compile this revelation. Let's read here. He's saying, Abu Bakr as Siddiq sent me when the people of Yamama had been killed, a number of the Prophet companion who fought against Musaylima. I went to him and found, so this is Zayd ibn Tab talking, and found Omar bin Khattab, the second caliph, sitting with him, with Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr then said to me, Omar has come to me and said, casualty were heavy among the Qur'an of the Quran, those who knew the Quran by heart, and the reciters of the Quran on the day of the Battle of Yamama. And I'm afraid that more heavy casualty may take place among the Quran on other battlefield, whereby a large part of the Quran may be lost. So they were worried because they did not have a written text. They had the Quran being memorized, so they got afraid. Therefore, I suggest you, Abu Bakr, order that the Quran be collected. I said to Omar, how can you do something which Allah's apostle did not do? Omar said, by Allah, that is a good project. So Abu Bakr is telling Omar, this, the Prophet Muhammad did not compile the text. You who are not a prophet, how can you think about something like that? And then Omar kept on urging me to accept his proposal till Allah opened my chest for it, and I began to realize the good in the idea which Omar had realized. Then Abu Bakr said to me, you are a wise man, talking to now Zayd ibn Thabit, and we do not have any suspicion about you. We trust you, and you used to write the divine revelation for Allah's messenger. So you should search for the fragmentary script of the Quran and collect it in one book. By Allah, if they had ordered me to shift one of the mountains, it would not have been heavier for me than ordering me to collect the Quran. So he's saying the task of collecting this information about the revelation is way more difficult than lifting up a mountain. And then I said to Abu Bakr, how will you do something which Allah's messenger did not do? Abu Bakr replied, by Allah, it's a good project. He's repeating what Omar had said to him previously. Abu Bakr, on urging me to accept his idea until Allah opened my chest for what he had opened the chest of Abu Bakr and Omar. So I start looking for the Quran and collecting it from what was written on palm stalk. Now notice some of the revelation were written on palm stalk, thin white stone, and also from the men who knew it by heart. So in their head, memorization, till I found the last verse of Surah At-Tawbah, that's Surah 9, repentance, with Abi Huzaima al-Ansari. So notice what he's saying here. He was searching everywhere for every revelation, every verse that has been revealed to Prophet Muhammad. He could not find this last two verse of Surah 9. And only one person had that memorized. So the Quran today, which has those two verses, contain an eyewitness, a single eyewitness for those two verses. The Bible is telling us we cannot rely on the testimony of one single person. But that's what Muslims are doing here, right here. He says, so I start looking for the Quran, collecting it, until I found the last two verses. Verily, the verse is, verily, there has come unto you an apostle, Muhammad, from among yourself. It grieved him that you should receive any injury or difficulty till the end of Surah Bara, which is Al-Tawbah, Surah 9, verse 128, 129. Then the complete manuscript of the Quran remained with Abu Bakr till he died. Then with Omar till the end of his life, and then with Hafsa, the daughter of Omar. So once Abu Bakr, who spent 2 years as a caliph, he died, he was replaced by Omar, who spent 10 years, and he was assassinated after 10 years. Then he gave that copy of the Quran to his daughter Hafsa. That's what the Muslim source are telling us. Okay, let's continue. Hadith 510 now. This is what he's saying, narrated now by Anas bin Malik. Let me remind you who Anas bin Malik. He's a companion of the Prophet Muhammad who was from Medina. You remember when the Prophet Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina, he was welcomed by these people who embraced Islam, and they became part of his companion. And one of them is Anas bin Malik. This is what he said. Hudayfa bin al-Yamam came to Uthman at the time. Now Uthman was the third caliph. At this time, Umar is already dead after 10 years of ruling. He was replaced by Uthman bin Affan. Okay, and the people of Sham and Iraq were waging war to conquer Armenia and Azerbaijan. We may think about this as Azerbaijan or Armenia. Hudayfa was afraid of the people of Sham and Iraq, differences in the recitation of the Quran. Okay, so he said to Uthman, O chief of the believers, he was the caliph, save this nation before they differ about the book, meaning about the Quran, as the Jew and the Christian did before. Now, let's pause here and think about what they're saying. They're saying the Jews and the Christians, let's not differ the way they differ. Let me just remind you first. The Jew and the Christian have the same exact Old Testament. The 39 book of the Old Testament is exactly the same, recognized as the authority as the Word of God by the Jew and by the Christian. The only difference is, in addition to this Old Testament, the Christian have the New Testament, which is the revelation of Jesus Christ, who is the last prophet who came to redeem mankind. So there is no difference. Okay? Unlike in the Quran, where we're going to see that there are many compilations of the Quran after the death of Prophet Muhammad by their own sources. And this is what he's saying. Then he said, so Uthman sent a message to Hafsa, who had one copy of the Quran compiled by Zayd ibn Tab, if you remember. Then he says, send us the manuscript of the Quran so that we may compile the Quranic material in perfect copy and return the manuscript to you. Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Uthman then ordered Zayd ibn Thabit, Abdullah zin az-Zubair, Said bin al-As, and Abdul Rahman bin Hari bin Hisham to rewrite the manuscript in perfect copy. So they took the first copy and they made a second compilation, and this is what is called the Uthmanic version of the Quran. And then Uthman said to the three Qurayshi men, in case you disagree with Zayd ibn Tab, who was from Medina, and on any point in the Quran, then write it in the dialect of the Quraysh, okay, which is the tribe of Muhammad. The Quran was revealed in their tongue. So they did so, and when they had written many copies, Uthman returned the original manuscript to Hafsa. Uthman sent to every Muslim province, you had some major province around this time, one copy of what they had copied, okay, in order that all other Quranic material, notice that, whether written in fragmentary manuscript or whole copy, be burned. So once they have made the second compilation of the Quran, the Caliph requested explicitly that every other connesis, every other compilation be burned, destroyed. Now, this is not the history of the formation of the New Testament books, because we had eyewitnesses who wrote down everything, the revelation that God has given to them. Okay? And in the 2nd and 3rd century, we have some false documents, some apocryphal book, as we call them, who came about claiming to be written in the 1st century. But when we take a close look at these two copies, we realize there's differences, and we don't need to burn anything. The Christian let everything flow until to this day. And if you want to check, you can go check it. But Muslims, we don't have access to that today. We cannot tell what was the differences between what Ibn Masud or some other authority in Quranic recitation had left as a compilation, because Uthman has destroyed everything. And let's continue with our Hadith. Surah Hadith 5:10. Zayd ibn Tab again added, a verse from Surah Al-Ahzab was missed by me when we copied the Quran, and I used to hear Allah's messenger reciting it. So once they compiled everything, you realize one verse was missing. So we searched for it and found it with Huzaima bin Thabit al-Ansari. And that verse is verse 23 of Surah 33. So only one person, again, a single witness. And they base their actual Quran today from one single witness. The last Hadith, 511, book 61, volume 6 of Sahih Bukhari, still again narrated by Zayd ibn Tab. He said, Abu Bakr sent for me and said, you used to write the divine revelation for Allah, so you should search for the Quran and collect it. He started searching for the Quran till I found the last two verses of Surah Al-Tawbah with Abi Huzaima al-Ansari. We saw it earlier, and I could not find these verses with anybody other than him. They were, and he's citing the verse, verily there has come to you an apostle, Muhammad, from among yourself. It grieved him that you should receive any injury or difficulty. Surah 9, verse 128 and 129. These are the circumstances around which the Quran was written down. This is what the Muslims are telling us, but you can tell all the difficulty, all the problems surrounding the transmission of this so-called preserved Quranic text. We're going to stop here, and in our next video, we'll look at some companion of the Prophet, what they say about some missing verse, missing chapter of the Quran. The Quran that Muslims are reading, reciting today does not contain those surah or those chapters. Stay tuned. We will get to that in our next series of video. God bless you.